In Ipswich this week, the city is set to play a key role in supplying materials for Olympic infrastructure, with a major new steel mill moving forward, new housing on the way for vulnerable residents, and a controversial composting proposal tied to Ipswich's long-running odour issues is back in play. Hey, Adam here, welcome to the Ipswich update for week 12. Let's get updated. First up, Ipswich is set to play a major role in one of the biggest challenges facing southeast Queensland right now, building enough infrastructure ahead of the 2032 Olympics. A new steel mill is planned for the region, focused on recycling scrap metal into construction-grade steel that could be used for things like stadia, bridges, and housing. And this is significant for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it helps address supply. With so many major projects happening all at once, there's increasing pressure on construction materials, and having local production reduces reliance on imports and long supply chains. But just as importantly, this is being positioned as a more sustainable approach. Instead of relying purely on traditional steel production, the facility would recycle scrap metal, reducing waste and lowering emissions compared to conventional methods. And for Ipswich specifically, it also represents jobs and economic activity, particularly in industrial areas that have long been parts of the region's identity. So this is one of those projects that sits at the intersection of infrastructure, sustainability, and economic growth. And it's likely to become an important part of the region's development in the lead up to 2032. Now to housing, and specifically support for vulnerable residents. Construction is now underway on a 24-unit housing complex in Ipswich North, aimed at providing more homes for people in need as part of a broader push to increase social and affordable housing across Queensland. Ipswich is one of the fastest growing regions in the state, and that growth is putting increasing pressure on housing availability, particularly for lower income households. Projects like this are designed to help address that gap. But at the same time, they also highlight the scale of the challenge. While new housing is being delivered, demand continues to grow, meaning that for many people, access to stable and affordable housing remains difficult. So this is part of the solution, but not the whole picture. Now to a follow-up from last week, and this one is significant because it ties directly into the long-running odour issues affecting communities around Swanbank and New Chum. Last week, Ipswich City Council rejected WMI's request for a 3-year time extension on an existing approval connected to its composting operations. The issue here wasn't just some generic paperwork extension. WMI had approval to move from its open composting facility at Swanbank to an enclosed processing plant, but was seeking more time to deliver that transition. And that's significant because open-air composting of odorous material has been identified as a major contributor to the broader odour issues that have affected nearby residents for years. Council said no to the extension, which effectively put more pressure on WMI's approved plan and on the timeline for shifting away from those open processing arrangements. Now this week, WMI has lodged an appeal. That means the matter now moves to the Planning and Environment Court, so the final outcome won't necessarily rest with Council alone. At this stage, there still aren't many publicly available details around the exact grounds of the appeal. But what is clear is that this is not just about a development technicality. It sits right in the middle of one of Ipswich's biggest ongoing environmental and public health issues, whether odorous composting activity in the Swanbank and New Chum area is being brought under control quickly enough. I'll be following this closely here on the Brisbane Channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you can keep up with everything as it happens. The odour problem is one environmental issue Ipswich is dealing with, but there are others emerging as well. A new textile recovery facility, to be run by Salvo's stores, has opened in the Ipswich region, the first of its kind in Australia. The idea behind it is to process and recycle clothing and textiles that would otherwise end up in landfill. And that's important because textile waste is becoming a significant issue in Australia. Each year, more than 200,000 tonnes of clothing end up in landfill, with Australians among the highest consumers of clothing per person in the world. On average, Australians buy around 50 to 60 items of clothing per year, and a large proportion of those items are worn only a handful of times before being discarded. And a big part of what's driving that is the shift toward faster and more affordable fashion. Clothing is now being produced and sold in much higher volumes than it was a few decades ago, often at lower price points, which can lead to shorter product lifespans and higher turnover. The result is that a large amount of textile waste ends up in landfill, even though much of it could potentially be reused or recycled. So facilities like this are trying to address that gap by recovering materials that would otherwise be thrown away and keeping them in use for longer. It also reflects a broader shift towards what's called a circular economy, where materials are reused and repurposed rather than discarded. So while it might not be as visible as a major infrastructure project, it's another example of how Ipswich is playing a role in emerging industries. And just quickly, Ipswich residents now have their chance to have their say on proposed changes to local laws. This covers things like community standards, regulations, and how certain activities are managed across the city. So if you're interested in how those rules are shaped, this is one of those opportunities to provide input before decisions are finalised. I've put a link in the video description. And to finish on something a bit lighter, Waterfest is returning to Ipswich over the coming months. The program runs from March through to May and includes a range of free and low-cost activities focused on the city's rivers, creeks, and natural environment. That includes things like fishing events, canoeing sessions, wildlife and waterbug activities, and environmental workshops. There's even a catch, snap, and win fishing competition where participants can go into the draw to win a kayak. There are also community planting events aimed at improving waterways like Bundamba Creek, helping stabilise riverbanks, support wildlife, and improve resilience to flooding. So if you're looking for something to do over the next couple of months, that's definitely one to check out. If you want to stay across everything happening in your local area, you can check out the updates for Brisbane, Logan, Moreton Bay, and the Redlands in the playlist linked on screen and in the description below. And if you want the full picture across Greater Brisbane, the overview video is here as well. See you there.